Welcome to podcast number, and I can't remember what number it is, and it's the first episode of series number 2, and our special guest is the amazing Jason Heath. Welcome, Jason.
Hi, Jason.
Well, Susan, David, it's an honor to be here and be a part of this. And I love to be kicking off the second season. I love that you're doing seasons. That's a wonderful way to sort of like bracket off like a set of episodes or like and I just love what you're doing. I can't wait to follow along as you keep putting out new episodes and chatting together and chatting with cool guests, and just what you cover I think is awesome. So thanks for having me on board.
Oh, thanks for coming on board. This is great. And we're excited to have you here, but also honored that you listen to all the podcasts that we put out.
Well, I've been wanting there to be more podcasts about the double bass for forever, and so every once in a while something pops up and it's awesome and I love it, but I think it's a rising tide lifts all ships kind of thing. I've been podcasting for a long time, but I was not the first double bass podcast. There was a podcast called the Double Bass Cast, and I think his name was Peter Jones maybe, and he did like 5 episodes and then quit. He quit before people even had iPods, I think. So one of these days I'll get him on and we could talk like real old school bass podcasts.
Yeah, what a good idea. So I have a question for you, of course. Here you are, you're a great performer, a fabulous teacher, you've got this well-rounded career, and then all of a sudden you decided to start Contrabass Conversations podcast. Where did the idea come from? Like, how did this all start? What happened?
Well, I decided I was fed up with taking professional orchestra auditions. And I was just like, I was driving to the Kansas City Symphony to take an audition, had barely practiced enough, walked in there. I thought, like, I want my deposit check, so I'll just go take the audition. I could have just kept driving on the freeway back home, which I probably should have done, but I went in there, just had a horrible audition, and I was like, all right, we got to figure out something else to do with life. So I all of a sudden thought, well, what am I going to do with these 4 hours a day where I'm banging my head against the wall practicing Beethoven 5? Probably wasn't the right way to be practicing Beethoven 5, by the way, for old Jason. But and I wandered around. I was living in Chicago, the neighborhoods, and I thought, and I'd always been into technology, and podcasting was just kind of getting going around then. And I got my first iPod, and I discovered this podcast directory. And then I, of course, like you do, I thought, like, double bass, what is there? And I found this Double Bass Cast. Oh my goodness. But he hadn't put out an episode in like a year already. And so I thought, yeah, I could do this. I'd like to do this. And I prepped for a while, and I put out some really awkward episodes starting January 1st, 2007. I think I talk about what I'm about to talk about in the podcast. In the second episode, I think I was talking about the bass auditions that were happening, which is not real evergreen content. If you're curious about what was happening February 2007, go listen to my first or second podcast. And then I think I was even talking about the microphone I was talking into. I just didn't have I didn't know what I was going to do. And then I finally got into the interview kind of format, and which I don't always do, but usually do. And it's been a great education for me. It's one of those good for you activities, I think. Like, even if I didn't put any of these out, I get a lot of benefit from having conversations like this.
Yeah. Oh,
It's interesting. I've really enjoyed listening. I've listened to really many of them. And I think it's really opened everyone's eyes and ears to what a fantastic instrument the bass is. And just, it doesn't matter what style of music you play, there's a place for you in the bass world. It's a really amazing thing. One thing I read about you, Jason, was that you had a 15-year plan, a career plan. Is that right?
Yeah, there's a wonderful author here in the States named David Cutler. He put out a book called The Savvy Musician, and he reconnected with me. We did an interview for his second edition of the book, and I had put out a blog post about, I was digging through some old files years ago, and I found this yellow sheet of legal paper, and it was Jason's 15-year plan circa 2001 or something like that. And I thought, like, oh my goodness. And it was so specific. It's so hilariously not what I did. And I think 5-year plan was get a full-time professional orchestra job in a group like, I don't know, the Kansas City Symphony. And then 10-year plan was get into the Chicago Symphony. And 15-year plan was principal bass of the Chicago Symphony. And I was like, wow, well, look at how I massively didn't achieve any of those. I just thought it's sort of fun, the kind of naivete of youth. But I think it's good to set goals, even if you go way up. There's like a focus that comes into that, and I am happy doing what I've done in those 15 years plus since that. But yeah, didn't hit any of those goals.
Well, I think you went the way you were supposed to. David and I, our first podcast was like, how did you get where you are today? And we were talking about how you have to set goals, right? That's part of life for no matter what your career is. But more often than not, that's not actually the right thing. And you find your place, you find what you're supposed to be doing. Like, I think that your podcasts, your Double Bass headquarters, all of the things that you've done have brought the Double Bass community together, have bonded us. You have a positive, uplifting spirit about you. And so every time you talk to somebody, you have something nice to say. And I think that's something that was needed and still is needed. And so I think you found your place. And maybe you would have been less effective in the land of double bass as principal of the Chicago Symphony, because I think you've reached more people this way,
Well, I appreciate the kind words. It's sort of a running joke here in San Francisco. People are like, I'm like weirdly well known in the bass world. So we'll go out. I'll go out somewhere with one of the title chair players in the San Francisco Symphony, and he gets a kick out of this. We'll go somewhere and I'll get recognized. He never gets recognized. He should be recognized. He's up there on stage every night, but I get recognized through the internet stuff. The wonderful Diana Gannett, she told me something that has stuck with me. I was asking her advice you'd give to young people, or have given to young people. And what she said was, when you wake up in the morning, what are you fascinated by? Chase that, and it'll probably work out. And I think that's really good advice. Even if it seems strange, even if it seems kind of kooky, the more I've done this podcast, the more I realize the vastness of possibilities that there are in this music world. My experience growing up and going to school, and Susan, I know you can relate, we probably had similar training. I was just trained to like orchestral double bass playing American style. That's sort of like all I knew. And my eyes have just been opened so tremendously, and my mind opened, talking to people from different corners of the world, doing everything. And the more I've done podcasts and just chatted with people, and the more I realized, like, wow, you really can go in such an endless variety of fascinating directions. And I do think that Diana Gannett advice is just like, something's going to vibe with you. Go after that. What do you wake up thinking about? And
so
I've tried to follow that over the years.
I think that's great advice. I think everyone should share that concept, because whatever it is you wake up thinking about, that's really what's getting you going, or gets you out of bed and spurs you through the whole day. That's what you're passionate about. That's where you should put your focus and your attention. And, it's true. I mean, in America, when you and I were in college, because we're about the same age, it was, you will train to get an orchestral job. End of story. No other choices were presented to us. And in the past 5 years or so, you guys both know, I've been sort of exploring some solo career-ish type things. And man, that's stuff that if I had learned those pieces in college, I would have been laughed at, because it wasn't Beethoven 5. It wasn't Ein Heldenleben. And why are you wasting your time? But it's fun, and that's one of the things that gets me out of bed in the morning is, learning the new piece that David Hayes wrote and things like that. But it's really different. And I think it's wonderful for people. Your podcast helps with this, for people to know there's more than just orchestral jobs out there.
There's a lot more, and the path, even if that is your path, the way to that path might not be just banging your head against the wall with, something Jeff Turner, the wonderful longtime principal bassist of the Pittsburgh Symphony, teaches at Indiana now. He told me he was the head of the Pittsburgh Symphony audition committee for years and years, and he said one commonality across the board: violinists, cellists, oboists, people who would be successful at the Pittsburgh Symphony audition, they usually had done something else artistically recently? Like they had just played a recital or done it too, and they brought something more than just, you know, polishing to perfection those few excerpts. And I thought that was an interesting observation from Jeff.
Yeah, that's it. That's actually something Cindy Myers, the piccolo player with the Boston Symphony, she said to me, she, in her warm-up room before her audition, didn't open any of her excerpts, and she played just a solo piece that she loved and was just playing that. And she said she felt like that kind of reminded her of these instruments are supposed to be artistry, you know, and music is music, and it's not these five measures or this one movement of a piece. It's speaking to people on a broader level. So I think I bet there's a lot of truth to a lot of audition winners having had that experience.
Yeah.
So I had another question. I'm hogging the questions, David. I'm sorry.
That's okay. I'm used to it now, so don't worry.
So here you have, Jason, Contrabass Conversations, the podcast, and then you started publishing. And it was through, I think Gumroad was like maybe the server or whatever. And now it's turned into Double Bass headquarters, and you've got, you know, merchandise and music and all sorts of stuff. How did this all evolve?
Right. Well, none of that was my idea. It's just crazy how things do evolve, right? And then things take a path, and that was the whole publishing side was inspired by the wonderful bass composer and bassist in the Atlanta Symphony, Michael Kurth. He reached out to me with a message and said, like, "Hey, I've got like 200 titles for bass, and I just want to like put them somewhere and get them out there. And you've got a presence. How about we do that?" And then my business partner, kind of longtime business partner at this point, Trevor Jones, he said, like, well, why don't we try to turn this into something that will bring revenue to bass composers? And I'm good at some things, you know, a logical step-by-step business plans isn't really one of them typically, but Trevor's been a great partner in that. And so it was one of those, like, let's just build it and see if it works quick and dirty. And we use this service Gumroad, which was great. We tried to do it on this very old creaky website that I had. And I realized, like, this website is going to die if I try to like make it do this. And it's just sort of evolved and kind of taken on a life of its own, and it's been really cool. I didn't have any expectations. I didn't even have the idea, but it's just been something. It's been cool to see how. It's cool to see every month how bass players are writing cool music. People are picking it up. People are discovering other composers through this music. And now we've got this nice, shiny new site. And to just go down the rabbit hole every once in a while late at night, I'll get sucked into my own rabbit hole. I'll be on there and I'll be like clicking through some of David's pieces, and it takes you to another piece. And it's just sort of this beautiful blue ocean. I think before we started recording, that term came up of like titles that you probably don't even know about. I've had such a great time moving out here to California, getting into like learning new music and new pieces. And I a few years ago, I was I don't think I even learned a new piece for 10 years when I was in my audition prep phase. I don't think I ever learned one new, which is so sad, you know, besides orchestral pieces that were on a gig. And as I've started to kind of embrace being a solo player or somebody besides just someone singing in an orchestra section, it's been really fun and inspiring for me. And so it's just, it's a really cool thing that evolved that both of you have been a part of. And I never thought that I'd be involved in any of that in any way, but it's been really cool to see take place.
Yeah.
For me, it came just at the right time. We'd been publishing for, I think, about 33, 35 years, something like that. And our distributor had problems during lockdown. And then suddenly they gave us 5 weeks notice to say they were no longer offering distribution services or websites. And they had everything. They had my website and they had all my music. And they used to sell everything for me. And suddenly within 5 weeks, I had to have a new plan. And I think that's when I contacted you. Maybe we'd put a few pieces on there already, but then suddenly it became sort of an industrial scale where we had suddenly more pieces. And it's yours is now the website that I use mostly for recital music. because it's fantastic. I deal with you occasionally. I mainly deal with Trevor Jones, who is amazing. Nothing is ever a problem. If I don't know something, he'll find the answer for me, or he'll suggest another way of doing something. It's a perfect solution. It's a perfect partnership. So I'm eternally grateful, Jason, to both of you for what you've done and for helping me get recital music out much further.
Well, I'm grateful to you too. I remember that message, and it was like right around when I think we had just put it out. I remember these conversations behind the scenes with Trevor because we were trying to build it on this former blog site, and then we somebody who's got he's actually worked in marketing in the fitness industry for years and years. He reached out to us and said, "Hey, I think I can help you guys." And the three of us brainstorming. Then we hired a company called Wonderly based out of Chicago, and we were looking on some like cheaper services like Upwork or something, but we decided to go with a premium service, and I'm glad we did. And they sort of helped us engineer all this together. And yeah, it's been fun to that's been a fun. And now that's just like a part of my day. I'm going to sit down and write a blog post on something, and I might pull from an older podcast episode. And it's always fun when the projects in your life, there's some overlap. The Venn diagram overlaps a bit, and I kind of think like these days for me, I make stuff on the internet. Sometimes I'm talking about pieces. Sometimes I'm talking about vibrato. Sometimes I'm doing or whatever. I'm doing a podcast interview, and then I do some work in the music industry as well for a musical instrument company here in California, Eastman. And then I play bass. You know, I'm getting ready to play Don Juan with the San Francisco Symphony when they kick off the season, and Beethoven 9 a few weeks after that. And so it's fun to like. And when I'm at the symphony, I get an idea for a video, and that all sort of helps the music industry job. And so it's always kind of fun when the various projects in your life can overlap like that.
That's great. How do you manage your time? So, like, you know, you're prepping some stuff for San Francisco Symphony. You've got blogs, and you do a lot of like great videos, and some of them are super short, which is amazing that you get like a ton of info in the short ones. Like, do you brainstorm about how much time you're going to spend on each thing? Like, how do you do it?
Yeah, I tried. I had when I started making stuff online, maybe 2005. I got started 2006, 2007. I was really just busy in life. I went back to school and got a teaching degree, and so I was in school for a bit, and then I was working, and so I was writing this stuff at like 4 a.m. or 11 p.m. I remember waking up at midnight to do an interview with Michael Klinghoffer because it was the only time I could find that where our time zones would work, and he was lovely, but I sound so tired. If you listen to this, I'm just exhausted, you know. And so when I got so burned out, I just quit. I didn't put anything out online, no podcast or anything for several years. And then I decided to get back into this in 2015. But I said to myself, I want to enjoy my life. So part of it, and I enjoy the work I do. But if I do too much of it, I don't like it so much anymore. And then there's always when I'm not playing, I have much more control over my schedule, but then playing happens or travel happens. So I just try to make sure I don't bite off more than I can chew, and I like what I do. So I keep banker's hours basically. I start working around 8 a.m. and I shut this laptop no matter what at 5 p.m. And then usually one day a week, I try to go out and really change it up. Like I'll take the dog out to the Golden Gate Bridge, and I'll bring my iPad, and I'll probably do some writing, but I just try to like get out of my hobbit hole and try to do something different and stay off of email, stay off of social media on the weekend. And that's been a nice balance for me. And it means that when I'm on and I'm working, quote unquote working or whatever it is I do, I'm like really focused because it's almost like a game. Like how much can I do in this? Because even, you know, I think anybody who's lived enough years realizes that even when you have an entire day to yourself, you don't have that many hours. You got to eat, you got to do this, you got to do that. The dog needs to go out a few times a day, and really, you know, you got a few, and then you get burned out if you're really focused. So I try to make sure that I'm not biting off more than I can chew, and so yeah, just keeping those banker's hours has been helpful for me.
That's
and
smart.
then if I'm on the road, all bets are off. You might see me at a conference, they're like, "That's not what you do at all. You're out till 1 a.m. cruising." Yeah, I do. But you know, when I'm actually like in my like normal day-to-day activity, I try to be be careful with how much time I allot to things.
That's smart.
That's so impressive. I'm really impressed that you have banker's hours. Because I start working as soon as I get up, and I keep going until I sleep, and I never burn out. And I love every minute of every day. It's so different. It's yeah, I would really struggle if I had to do 8 until 5. I
Well,
think because maybe I like, maybe I'll take an hour off in the middle, and I'll then take another hour off somewhere else. So maybe we do the same amount of work, but mine is just spread out during the day.
and you know what? That's a good. Yeah, I do. You know, ideas are going to pop into your head whenever,
Mm.
right? And so I do have an idea capture system. So like, if an idea pops into my head at 9 a.m., oh, I'm writing that down. But I don't let myself actually sit down and I do break these rules. You know, they're more like guidelines. But yeah, and that's awesome. And people are so different. Like bringing up Michael Kurth, who was the inspiration for that. Michael said like, he's like, I'll sleep when I'm dead. That's what he told me. And he is like a composition machine. You'll see I'll wake up, you know, open up my email, and he's already written a new suite, and then like an hour later I'll get the first revision on the suite, and he just goes, and then when he's off, he's out taking pictures of abandoned churches with pianos in rural Georgia, and he's just got that artistic fire, and I just think everybody's different, you know.
And I think one of the things that's important, and I don't know if teachers now, I mean, I work on this with my college students, but you know, find your way that works. What is your peak practice time? What is your peak time for different things during the course of the day? And know that your roommate or your partner may or may not have the same type of work schedule. My husband is a night owl. He will start a project at 10 p.m. and I'm like, dude, I'm out. I can't do it. I just can't. But I'm a morning person, and I'll get up early and I'll practice, and he'll be like, "Oh, why are you awake?" You know, that sort of thing. But it works. But we each know this is what works for me. This is what works for you. But you hit on another thing that, Jason, that I think is really important, and I'm such a goober. But so I recently stumbled across a movie called Marcel the Shell with Shoes On. It's this little animated film about a shell that's like, of course, humanized. Absolutely adorable. It's a really good, like, feel good movie. But so now I'm taking advice from an animated shell. But he says, I don't just want to survive. This is me in a nutshell, right? So he says, I don't just want to survive. I want to have a good life. And sometimes I think when we're on the audition path, or when we're on the path that we think we're supposed to be on, we're surviving. But you get to a certain point, and some people it happens when they're, you know, teenagers. Some people it doesn't happen until they're in their 40s or whenever. You want to find the good life, the life for you that makes you happy. You get up in the morning excited to get up and do whatever's going to be happening during your day. And I think that you and I both got off the audition path around the same time. We were both like, yeah, you know what? This isn't good. This isn't productive for me. This doesn't make me happy. And will the end result be something I love? I don't think so. You know, and you find that what makes you tick. David has this amazing balance of composing and teaching. Although he's not at Wells, he's still teaching, performing so many performances that he's got in his diary for these days, and just, you know, finding the things that keep you going. And I try with my students to encourage them to really kind of soul search and don't do what they think they're supposed to do. Find what it is that they love and bring some joy. And again, back to, like, you know, you and your podcast and your website, I feel like that's what you are encouraging people to do. I don't know if you realize that you're doing it, but you're like the poster child for all of us, for finding your heart and your soul in this kind of crazy world of music.
I appreciate that. It's funny because, like, create, you know, I've gone through phases in life where I taught a lot, and then I was a public high school orchestra teacher, so I was around hundreds of students a day, you know, just that constant activity. And then, you know, these days I spend a lot of time by myself, and like you know, if someone just looked at me right now, they'd think I'm like an insane person talking to my computer. But the three of us are actually chatting. But a lot of, especially the video projects I do, that really, it's just like me staring into the black eye of a camera. And even though I know that that what I do goes out and connects with people. I mean, I can look at the numbers and I can see it still doesn't really register in my brain. And so it kind of freaks me out when I go somewhere, like I was just at the International Society of Bassist convention, and to have people come up and talk about all these, podcasts or things or videos or that kind of thing. I just sort of, I intellectually, I know this goes out into the world, but it's still kind of crazy to realize that actual humans are connecting with what I'm doing. I'm sure composers feel the same way, and then teaching too. It's crazy how the time you spend with a student, how that kind of radiates through, and as they live, I look at what some of my students from 15 years ago are doing now, and it's just kind of crazy that I was a part of that journey.
Yeah. Or you'll have a student, I don't know if this ever happens to either of you, student will be like, remember that time you told me like that thing about the dog? I'm like, I have no clue. Oh my God, you guys are listening to me and remembering. This is horrifying. I have to be really careful of what I say. And then I'm like, oh, well, which dog story was it? And it'll be like, the dog stopped and was singing along when I was practicing or whatever. But I'll be like, oh my God, what am I telling these students? You worry.
Oh, I remember one of my first serious bass students, he just asked like, hey, where should I go to music school? And I just rattled off 5 random schools off the top of my head. And those were the schools he applied to. And I thought, oh my goodness, I just shaped this young person's life. And maybe my gut instinct was correct. He's a principal bassist of an orchestra in Hagen outside of Cologne now.
Cool.
But still, I took a little more care crafting that list after that. But it is wild what you might say that connects, or things I remember from my teachers and influences.
Yeah, it's true. I think students really listen to what we say, sometimes more than we realize. Well, I know. Oh, David's going to say something, and I'm interrupting.
Oh no, please.
I know that. So I was just out at Tanglewood a couple weeks ago with the Boston Pops, and we did this big. We're going on tour to Japan in October, and we're taking like 3 different John Williams-y programs. And someone took a picture. One of the bass players was like, "Oh, let's take a section picture," which is something I never think of. And it was Liz Valser. She's so smart. She's very cool, and she's just like, "Let's get a section picture." So she did, and she posted. And the next thing I know, it was Jason. It was in one of your newsletters. Like, "Oh, look at this cool picture," and I was like, "Oh my gosh!" Like you feel. If something makes it to Jason Heath's newsletter, you feel like, oh my God, I'm famous. I'm in. And it was hysterical. And like everyone started emailing each other in the section that morning. Did you see Jason put it in his newsletter? This is so cool. You made everyone's day. It was hilarious because we were surprised, but also very honored to have made it in there.
Oh, that's hilarious. Well, that newsletter is a fairly recent thing too. I didn't have any sort of email anything until maybe 2017, and and again, Trevor Jones. Hats off to Trevor. We come up with this system where I send things to him that pop up on my radar, and he sort of organizes that. And then that company that we hired to redo our website, they sort of like helped us create a formatting that makes sense. And it's wild. I never thought that having an email newsletter would be something I do. But a lot of people are like, oh, you're the guy who does the videos and has the newsletter. It's like, to me, those things just got started. I think it's like, what about the podcast? That's like the thing I feel like I've certainly have done the longest. And it's just interesting how phases of life happen like that, and projects pop up that, again, like regular newsletter was never something that I thought I would be
I think
doing.
it's smart. It drives people to the website, and it has them checking out things, and it's a great way to kind of continue the excitement and the interest. And sometimes you have a busy week and you've forgotten about all your normal things, and then I'm like, oh, I get the newsletter. Oh yeah, let me check out what's new on the website, which is fun.
Well, it's nice to have a few, putting on like my business hat. Not that it's much of a hat, but like it is nice to have a few things that you do own, because the power of social media, there's also like a drawback of building stuff on rented land, and then they can change the game. And so like there really aren't that many things in this digital world that you can truly own. But like your new email newsletter list is one of those things. Your website is, and then what we're doing here, a podcast is another one of those things. Like it's really hard for quote unquote them to take it away from you. So those are 3 things that I've heard on various business podcasts I tap into as the 3, and it's like, hey, I have those 3. So
yeah, it's great. so smart.
Are you happy with your life as it is now? Are you happy with the balance you have? What are your next plans?
Yeah, well, that I mentioned that author David Cutler, the savvy musician. He said, "What are your goals now?" And I said, "I have one goal, and that is to like my life." And part of that means doing this kind of work that we're talking about, because I really enjoy and I get a lot. And I find it fun and creative. But part of that is also going out for wine tastings with my wife and going for walks with the dog. And I have really, in terms of next plans, I've been really having fun sort of embracing the role of being a bass journalist when I go to events. One of the, and all three of us will know this, there is a magic that happens when bassists gather, but that magic can be a little bit hard to communicate to people who aren't part of those gatherings. And so, like, I was just at the ISB convention this summer, which is great, and there may be 1,400 people there or something, but most bass players, 99% probably of bass players, weren't there. And so how to communicate what's cool when we bass players get together, that's part of like the idea behind the website, certainly. And I'm trying to do that in videos, but then as I'm going to these bass events, it's like, well, how can I cover these? So I'm trying to like get better photographs, do interviews, create video. And so that is something that I am having a good time with, just sort of showing what's happening on a local level in the double bass world, you know, that I'm only one human, so I can only be in a few places at a time, but to try to like where I am at, kind of capture the magic of bass community. That's maybe sort of an airy goal, but that's the thing that has been really capturing my attention these last couple of years. Now that I've been able to get back on the road and go around and travel.
That's great. World domination.
Yeah.
Jason for president.
Yeah.
Got my vote.
No, David and Susan for co-president. Yeah.
No, Susan for president.
Okay, there we go. Susan for
That
president.
sounds horrifying. It's great though, because I we're so happy that you're here joining us today, because you not only have all these great things going, but I feel like you've been the trailblazer. I know you say you weren't the first podcast for bass, but you're the one that caught on. You're the one that people noticed and really started listening to, and you've just been, doing the thing, and everyone's like, oh, what a great idea. And it's very exciting. It's exciting to watch everything unfold for you and all the hard work that you're doing. But it's also, you inspired us to start a podcast. David said to me one day, he said, we meet every week, we chat. We should record some of these and just do a podcast. And if no one listens, so no one listens. It's not going to hurt anybody. But, Jason Heath has this great podcast and everybody listens to it and it's great. And, it definitely inspired us.
Well, I'm glad you're doing it, and that's like the perfect example of a great reason to start a podcast. You're having these conversations. Why not just hit record and put them out? And you never know who's going to find them or when. And there's this crazy shelf life to this internet content that, I mean, I occasionally dip into my podcast statistics, and it's like, oh my goodness, these things from 2007 are still being listened to. And part of me thinks like, please don't go back that far. I was using this software that would have audio drift between me and the guest. Really strange. So I would get ahead of the guest, I think, and it bakes it into one track. So terrible software. But they would be talking, and all of a sudden I would start laughing like an insane person, and then they would tell a joke, and there'd be dead silence. And and it just like, the things, but it's so cool. You never, and like, I think about podcasts I listen to, they're like, I'm just sort of like on this journey with that person or those people, and I'm like walking the dog or doing the dishes, or I'm at the gym or whatever, and you just they become like your friends in a way that's different than other ways that you communicate with people, because especially if you're wearing like earbuds or something like that, that's like people are talking like directly into your head. It's just a very, very tight connection. And I find that with like podcasts I've followed for years, I feel like I know those people so well. So it's a really cool way to connect with people. And then also it's one of those things that I feel like it makes me a better person and certainly a better musician, because it makes me do research and reach out to people. And I might do that anyway without the podcast, but I will with the podcast. Like I just chatted with this wonderful jazz bassist in New York City, Marty Eisenberg, put out this really cool new album inspired by the movies of Wes Anderson. And I might have listened to that album if I wasn't going to chat with him, but I totally did. So I listened to this new album. I did some research. He had been on another podcast, so I listened to that. And it's just one of those. I grow my body of knowledge and connections with people. And it's one of those things that I think, you could lie and say you had a podcast and never publish it, and you'd get a lot of personal benefit out of it.
Yeah. I think it's great. But yeah, as you said, like the research that you do, David and I just did for our season 1 closer. Well, David, you should talk about it because it was your idea.
What was it?
It was the Desert Island Discs.
What was the last one we did? I can't remember.
Favorite fives.
Right. Oh yeah, in the UK on BBC Radio 3 is classical music. It's BBC Radio 4, which is spoken word. And there's been a program for, I don't know, 50, 60 years called Desert Island Discs. And somebody famous chooses 8 of their favorite recordings, and they cast away on a desert island, and they get the Bible, and they get the complete works of Shakespeare, and they can choose any other book and a luxury. And it was interesting. It's always interesting. Even the ones who hate music, it's really, really interesting. And so with Susan and I suggested we each chose 5 of our favorite bass recordings. And I did 5 of mine, and then the last program was yours, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And it's fascinating with listening to Susan's, going back to listen to these recordings I hadn't listened to for decades. And it was really, really interesting. And to hear your take on them and why you chose those 5.
Yeah. And it required, for these particular podcasts, it required research, of course, and listening to each other's, and going through, David was saying, I have like 300 or 400 solo recordings that are in my collection. I was like, I think I have 2. And so then I went through my stuff. I realized I had a lot more than that, maybe like 40 or 50, which for me, I was surprised by, but it pales in comparison to David's collection. But I was seriously like, oh my God, how am I going to have 5? And then I went through, I still have old CDs because a lot of things just aren't available in other formats, and I like them. So, so I was going through my CD collection, and I started pulling things like, oh my gosh, I really have a lot of recordings. As an orchestral audition trained bass player, I'd pick things up and I'd listen to them, and then I'd be like, I should be listening to, Zarathustra. So I'd put them away. But I had some that I had continued to go back to and had really enjoyed, and for different reasons. And some were newer, like Diego Zacarias's is newer. And I was just like, this was really fun. But it's great because when David or I come up with an idea, and I'm sure you have this for a podcast, then you're like, all right, I got to go do a little deep dive into this subject. And I love it because I learn about other things. And sometimes I feel like David is teaching me, like he really knows a lot about the Czech School of Bass Playing. And so we did an episode about that, and I did research that I could find, but he knows a lot too, so we were able to sort of talk about it, and it was great. I was like, I'm learning too.
I think you're a better deep diver than I am, if I'm honest. I think you're far more professional than I am.
I think they call it obsessive compulsive.
So I'm so pleased that Susan is part of this podcast, because she does all the hard work and I just turn up every week. It's so funny. It's so different.
It's a good balance. It's really fun because David comes up with a lot of great ideas, and I'm like, I better go research this.
But it was interesting with the CDs, because I think most of the players either I knew or I'd worked with, it was really nice to be able to share my knowledge of my passion, my enthusiasm for this. And it was interesting as you chose a CD by Ovidio Badilla, who is one of my great friends, and I did as well. And it's so fascinating that even 22 years after his death, people are still really understanding how good he was. He was just the best bass player I'd ever heard. And really, maybe the best musician. He didn't have an ego, because he knew he was the best. He didn't have to have an ego. he knew he was far better than all of us put together. He was amazing character. So yeah, so the podcasts have been amazing. So thank you for the inspiration, Jason. It's been
Yes.
really amazing.
Yes.
That's great. It's great. Yeah, and it's fun to like. I keep all my old notes from every podcast. I've used different pieces of software over the time, but it's wild to dive into. I have all my old notes from like 2007 and all this research and the way I've collected exchanges. But it's really fun to dip back in, and if I have someone on again, kind of like see like it's just it's just I don't think I do a lot of research, but when I look and go back and it's like, oh, I have done a lot of research. You know, it's it's fascinating.
It's very fun. It's great. It's great to have you on with us too, Jason.
Oh yeah, anytime. I'm honored to hang out, and it's but great idea for a show, and I've loved the show, and I can't wait to see where it goes.
Oh, thank you.
Thank
We
you.
want to thank everyone for listening and watching our season 2 opener. And I want to thank our sponsor, GraceGalleryDesign.net, for all your gift giving needs. And thank you, Jason, for coming. I know we're across time zones all here with West Coast and East Coast and then over in England. So, yeah, good coordinating for everybody. It was really great. But it's wonderful to have you with us, Jason. And I hope you'll come back.
I would love to come back, and thank you to both of you for the great conversation. And I look forward to seeing both of you again on Zoom or in person, or hopefully both soon.
Yes. Yes. Wonderful. All right.
Thank you for listening, everybody, and see you next time.
Bye-bye.